Well, welcome to Norm Eisen. Welcome as well to Word on the Street Live. We are coming to you at not our normal live time. We are generally speaking Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern, but we are so
Can't you
excited
do
to
a
have.
rerun? Can't you do a rerun tomorrow?
Well, you're in court, I take it. You probably are defending our democracy and trying to save our Constitution tomorrow at 4. So anyhow, we are really glad. Elon Goldenberg and I are here hosting Norm Eisen from the Contrarian, and we're back at our desks, Elon. This is it's good to see you back behind the mic. We were on various different vacation and travel locales last week, but we're back at our desks. And we're also, this is our first week, Norm. We have made Word on the Street an organizational Substack for J Street. We transitioned from.
I saw that because I'm a loyal Word on the Street follower. So I saw that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And we are really excited that more and more and I are both going to be posting, but we've got our whole policy center and our fellows and
Wow.
posted today a great piece I hope people take a look at that gives a little insight into Hamas over these 2 years, the kind of insight that I don't think you get in many mainstream outlets. And it's written by one of our policy staff as well as by a Palestinian from Gaza who is an expert on Hamas. He's not in Gaza at the moment now, but it's something that I think is really worth reading. And Norm, it's just great to have you here. I am trying to think about how do you summarize Norm Eisen's bio in under 10, 15 minutes or so. It is just an unbelievable litany. Norm, I've been doing the same thing for like 20 years, and I'm really dull and don't have that much on my resume. But it's just astounding to read your resume.
I have to warn the viewers of Word on the Street in its new official J Street 10 poll iteration that the three of us are actually friends and are going to have a real conversation like we would have over coffee on Dizengoff Street. And Jeremy, I've known uh, most of the period of assembling that bio. Shortly after I met my wife, we're gonna soon celebrate 30 years. Shortly after I met my wife, I was invited to a Shabbat dinner, and that's where I first met Jeremy. He was working at Fenton. Am I remembering that correctly, Jeremy?
There's a period there where I was working at.
Anyhow, it blurs together, but that's when I met that brilliant Jeremy. And then I met Elon years later because he was such a close colleague and confidant of one of my mentors in diplomacy and life, Martin Indyk, Ambassador Martin Indyk. I think that's when I first met you, right, Elon?
Yeah, no, when I was
Elon had
working
a
for
big,
Martin.
big, bushy head of hair like mine. No, not really.
We were
But he
just talking
was.
about that, Norm, before you got
The
on,
two of
actually.
you two of you look like twin brothers with the shirt and the hairline. I mean, and the microphone is tilted the same way. Here, I'm gonna ditch my jacket, so
There
at
you go.
least I somewhat.
You have to ditch your hair now. That's
God forbid, it's the only qualification I have for television. Very fortunately, I saw a statistic that most of the people who are watching you on television are doing so with the sound turned down. I think that explains the television career part of that bio. At any rate, and so grateful to be on the new and expanded Word on the Street and to be with two of my dear friends. And I don't know, do the two of you describe yourselves as liberal Zionists? That's how I
exactly.
describe
That's
myself. We're a
exactly.
dwindling breed,
It's a
guys.
dwindling breed. But we still believe that it is possible to recognize and reconcile the democratic nature and the Jewish nature of a state of Israel, and that's the goal: is
It's
to figure
gotta
out how to do
be.
that.
It's
It's the
gotta
only way.
be. It's the only way, and I like to think that we're actually ahead of the curve. And you were ahead of the curve in J Street. You know, people of my generation um, came up through the long-standing traditional Jewish institutions. My first job out of college was at the ADL, the Los Angeles Pacific Southwest region of the ADL. But I think where Jeremy, and of course Elon, you've done this in your policy for so long, but Jeremy, what you saw with J Street was that there was going to need to be an alternative in place for the day that we had matching autocrats. They're like, bookends, authoritarian bookends of Trump and Netanyahu. They both disrespect democracy. They both target the other, which is inimical to Judaism. If there's anything that Judaism stands for, it's welcoming the ger, the other, and
Exactly.
they're both corrupt. So you have these points of comparison. No wonder they're in cahoots with each other. And I'm so glad that J Street exists to fight for that vision of justice for both peoples, of a two-state solution. However steep that hill may appear to climb, it is pretty steep right now, guys. I'm not going to lie. And you really were out ahead of the curve. Who would have imagined that you would have the Mashgiach Rouhani, the longtime spiritual leader of Yeshiva University, organizing a letter of rabbis to speak out against the Netanyahu regime's actions in Gaza. So, you led the way, and we're very grateful for that.
Well, Norm, can I ask you actually? Because this, like, now we're sort of starting to have this conversation. Like, as you and I have talked about, right? Like, we work together on Jewish outreach on the campaign. I've known you for such a long time. Um, what does it? And you're so deep in your Judaism, right? Like, this is something I know is so important to you. Like, what does it feel like now, from your perspective, to be watching what is happening in Gaza, right? As an American Jew and as somebody who's been deeply invested in these issues for so long.
Feels like shit. Drek. I should utilize my Yiddish. Is Yiddish also welcome? Yiddish
Yiddish is
is actually
100% welcome on
welcome on the
the street.
street. Vort in the Gaza. That's the Yiddish, not Gaza. Gaza.
Gossip.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it feels terrible. I mean, as a human being, um, uh, no one can look at the situation and feel good about it, and the Israeli people don't feel good about it. A supermajority of Israelis, depending on the polls, upwards of 70%, want to see an end to this war. Of course, we condemn Hamas, their long-term violence, the pogrom that triggered this. We condemn the hostage taking, and we have the utmost sympathy and love for the remaining hostages, our brothers and sisters. But by the same token, another Yiddish saying, oh, my parents would get angry with me, Yesh Gavul, there's a limit. And there are limits. And the Netanyahu regime, I won't call it any more than I call the Trump regime. Do they represent America? No. Trump and what he's doing is anti-American. And the same I feel with this Netanyahu regime. He's hijacked that nation. And I feel that, we have a moral obligation. That's why I point to that Rabbi Yosef Blau letter of rabbis. I was very proud that my rabbi in our Orthodox congregation signed that. It was, I know not everybody agrees with it. It's been controversial in the Jewish community, but I feel if we stand for anything as Jews, as serious Jews, we have to stand for a posture of moral consistency, even when it's inconvenient. And that in no way takes away from my status as a liberal Zionist. It defines me as such. And, um, And that's my reaction to this situation.
Yeah, it's not just that you have the right to object. I think we have the responsibility. It is the legacy of centuries and millennia of Jewish morality and Jewish teaching and an understanding of the very essence of our creed, right? And you mentioned the ger before, and how you treat the other, and the whole basis, as I have come to understand it, and you know it better than me, of our faith is this concept of not treating other people the way that you don't want to be treated yourself.
That is Rabbi Akiva's categorical imperative on regel echad, on one leg. But it's complex, and I'm attempting to reflect that complexity and that struggle in setting the scene, because at the same time there is an obligation to the ger, the stranger, the convert, the other, the person who's different, the ger who sojourns among you. We also have an obligation to those hostages, to our Jewish brothers and sisters. We have an obligation to the safety and security of the state of Israel. Part of the place that I'm coming from is that Netanyahu's actions, they're wrong. It's just wrong what he's doing in Gaza now. But it's also wrong because it puts the release of the hostages further away. It puts them in danger. It puts the safety, security, and status of Israel in danger. And I feel that he's sacrificing what's best for the continuity of the Jewish state. Not to mention, I think the two-state solution is also right, but it is a moral as well as a pragmatic solution. He's endangering all that, and he's undermining the what had been through my entire adult life the bipartisan support for Israel. I remember, Jeremy, you must remember this too, going to synagogue with my parents, Yom Kippur War between 1967 and 1973, and what followed. We saw through all the ups and downs, we saw this enormous bipartisan coalition form that supported Israel. And Netanyahu is really jeopardizing that. And that's yet another reason. So it's overdetermined, it's complex. But the bottom line is it's wrong. And for all those reasons, we have an obligation to speak out.
Yeah, it's also causing. You guys see me, by the way? Okay,
We see and we
now
hear
we
you
see.
now. It's good to
technical
have
We're
you.
a
difficulties
little
over here.
dot. Well, my phone fell over.
Yeah,
So,
mine had some definite concerns. There was some panic here in I gotta say, in J Street Central.
But you're back. You're back.
I won't name any names, but I did a Substack Live with one of the most prominent new media orgs coming to Substack some time ago. And they could not get the invitation function to work for me. So I had to invite them. So, it's like the days of live television.
Absolutely. No, it's definitely like that, especially on your phones and whatnot. So, Norm, a follow-on question for you though on this, um, it kind of crosses into your multiple worlds, right? Which is we have this horrible stuff going on in Gaza and exactly what you were talking about. We also then have, real backlash in terms of anti-Semitism here in the United States, both from the right, from the left, and then you've got the Trump administration using it. This crosses into your other work, right? In your world of defending democracy, speaking for all of us to do things that like go far beyond defending countering anti-Semitism, right?
I wear many hats, many kippot, many yarmulkes. Here, I'll do something I've never done.
You're
No,
gonna
I'm
have to
not. I'm
prop.
just bending down. Yeah.
Oh.
This is the famous Saul LeWitt yarmulke that I spoke at his synagogue in Connecticut, and they gave me the silhouette. So it's a yarmulke with many strands. It's a visual aid to illustrate your point, Elon. The place in that equation, I do blame Netanyahu for making political judgments that are fracturing the American consensus on Israel, and undermining future generations of support. Obviously, I'm speaking out as a liberal Zionist, although those terms will also aggravate many, you know.
Even in the
Uh,
comments, I'm seeing it aggravating people. So yes, it's
yes.
good.
Yes. Well, it is what it is, friends.
Exactly. Yep.
Um, the one and I think there is this unholy partnership of two adversaries of democracies, two authoritarians. There were times, I know Prime Minister Netanyahu, I've had dinner with him. There were times in his career, he was never really my cup of tea, right? But he was in a more normal band of conservative political officials. He's gone off the deep end. Donald Trump was a Democrat, problematic Democrat, but he was a Democrat. You can all see the pictures of him and Melania laughing with Hillary and Bill Clinton. You can find video of me having dinner with Donald Trump on C-SPAN, that infamous Washington Correspondents' Dinner. And he and Melania, we sat together at the Washington Post table, and he and Melania were very pleasant dinner companions. But they've gone off the deep end together. It's like Thelma and Louise going off the democracy cliff. And so that's another point of commonality. The one place where I won't go is to blame Netanyahu or anyone for rising anti-Semitism. And Elon, you and I have talked about this with our friends. I blame the anti-Semites for that. So I'm not gonna assign blame. I mean, I'll say in a non-empirical way, just or I guess in a non-normative way, without blaming. Obviously it's a climate of greater danger, but I blame the anti-Semites for that. However, what Netanyahu is doing to the Palestinian people, it's not just Gaza. The violence is unacceptable in the West Bank as well. What he's doing there, and what he's doing to the bipartisan consensus, and the work that we're going to have to do to rebuild the two-state solution, but also to rebuild this big tent, he's making that really, really tough.
Yeah, and Nor, I'm definitely not of the view that I blame him for rising anti-Semitism. Like I said, I'm with you. I blame anti-Semites ultimately for anti-Semitism, but I do think and Jeremy, also interested in your take on this. I do think the environment that we have right now creates opportunity for more of that, and blaming American Jews for the Israeli government's behavior is anti-Semitism. Those are two very different things. At the same time, there's no question that what has happened in Gaza is creating an environment in which more anti-Semites are coming out of the woodworks and you've also got this real legitimate question about what is legitimate criticism of the Israeli government versus what is anti-Semitism, right? And this gets also at this question of freedom of expression and targeting academia for the purposes of things that I think have less to do with anti-Semitism and much more with the Trump administration's own interests in targeting academia for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I want to ask you about, Norm. I mean, that is precisely, it's the sweet spot for you, right? I mean, it's the intersection of the fight against democracy with the question of anti-Semitism and the manipulation by the Project Esther, crowd and how that fits into a larger agenda to attack higher education, to attack immigration, to undercut the rule of law. And they're using anti-Semitism as a pretext. This is not a good thing for the Jews, in my opinion.
There's nobody who looks at the situation that has unfolded on our campuses over the past years and says, oh, that's, the way universities have handled that has been perfect in every regard. It's been problematic in many places, and the conduct has been problematic. But to uh, allow Donald Trump, as part of his campaign, to undermine American democracy, um, using that as an excuse when he himself has appointed multiple people who fraternize with and celebrate neo-Nazis in his administration. That makes no sense for anybody who genuinely cares about anti-Semitism. Look, there's no issue of anti-Semitism with law firms, but he's attacked them. He's attacked unions, another foundation of the functioning of our democracy. Um, and um, um, and as you go, he's attacked businesses. He's gone after our media companies. What he's doing is looking for any excuse to degrade democracy, to soften. We've seen it around the world. Netanyahu's doing the same thing. Trump has gone after courts. Netanyahu has gone after courts. Trump has gone after the rule of law. Netanyahu has gone after the rule of law. So I think that we shouldn't fall for that excuse, and we should condemn it vigorously while attempting to make sure that universities remain places where there can be vigorous speech, vigorous debate, but also mutual respect for very strongly differing views.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've heard a lot, we have this program called J Street U, which is our college campus program. And so, we have thousands of college students who are actually living this every single day, right? And they are caught in the middle of a very unpleasant situation. On the one side, there are students with absolutely, no nuance and no perspective who are just saying the most awful things and attributing all of the bad things happening in Gaza to all of Jews or all of Zionists. And it is completely, unwelcoming space for a progressive Jewish liberal kid.
Yeah.
And you've got a daughter, I've got kids, Elon's got kids. So, we all understand this in a personal way. But at the same time, on the other side of the equation, you do have organizations coming in from the outside, trying to stir up trouble on college campuses and giving talking points to young students saying basically your classmates are all anti-Semites. I mean, the whole situation is very, very difficult. And it's causing, I think, a whole generation to walk away from the community and from the issues because they just don't want to be
Yeah.
caught in this vise.
I was recently on my college campus at Brown, and I talked to some of the kids there who are active in J Street, and it takes some bravery, not unlike the students on campus who are standing up for democracy, and people in our country who are marching. We just had massive mobilizations across the country yesterday on Labor Day, largest ever number of events and attendees at events for a Labor Day in recent memory. It does take some courage to try to walk that line, but I admire what you're doing with J Street U, and of course, I admire those kids who are willing to stand up for what they believe in: fairness and justice and a two-state solution, and no anti-Semitism, but no Islamophobia or xenophobia either. That's the meaning of liberalism, small L liberalism, that is the aspiration, the idea of the American project from John Locke to John Rawls, and J Street U exemplifies that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
these
that's exactly why we signed on, by the way, as an amicus brief in the Rameza Oster case at Tufts, because there has to be a Jewish voice saying, do not go after if a Muslim student writes an op-ed in the school newspaper criticizing what's happening in Gaza, do not come after them with masked agents in the street and try to deport them. And don't do that in our name. That is so critical that there be that J Street voice and that those students be represented, and that their, fellow students, their colleagues and the staff understand that they are not being represented by this administration when it comes to do that.
Um, the the um, tradition, the American idea, and it's really the best of the Israeli idea as well. Um, is one of vigorously standing up um, for those who need it, whether you fully agree with them or not. I know for me as a lawyer, the big example is John Adams, who represented, even though he was a patriot and our first vice president, our second president, he represented those British redcoats uh, who um, committed the Boston Massacre, and people said, "John Adams, how can you do that?" But he explained that that was his idea of how a rule of law system is supposed to work, and that's true to this day. And that's part of the reason that we've championed Israel as, which is the most pluralistic nation, even with all of these heinous acts by the Netanyahu regime. It still remains structurally a nation that can get past Netanyahu, just as I hope in our country we will have a restoration of democracy, because you can't call what Donald Trump is doing democracy or the American idea.
And Norm, I know you were talking about it being pretty grim, but the one piece of optimism I do want to give our audience is, like, we do have elections coming in Israel pretty soon. At the latest next November, I think much more realistically in the first half of next year. Sometime between January and June, we'll have elections in Israel. The polling for Netanyahu is really bad. The
Really bad.
opposition for 2 years straight since October 7th, the opposition has been polling at about 70 out of 120 seats, and Netanyahu and his coalition have been at about 50. And so, we have a moment coming where maybe we can have a more constructive government. It doesn't have to be, it's not going to fully align with American Jews. I think it's going to have what I'd call never Netanyahus as a key part of it,
Uh, uh,
like the Naftali Bennett's of the world. But,
yeah.
again, that's fine. I think it can be
Go on.
progress. They're all talking about ending the war. They're all
Go
talking about getting
on.
hostages out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gallant. That's it.
Yoav Gallant.
Yeah, the Bennett's, Lieberman, others. They're not exactly aligned with
They're not
running
the
the.
ones, would not be my list. But that is the tragedy. That is the tragedy, that it's the world we live in, not the world we want. And we need to make the best of that world. And in the same way, I saw a statistic that in the United States, Democrats have been overperforming by an average of double digits in all of the special elections this year. And in some states where it's more closely balanced, like the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, that turned into a landslide. Even in the Floridas of the world, red places, they're closing the gap and they're shrinking margins. That's why Trump is freaking out. And we know Netanyahu is freaking out too. He does not want these elections. So, it's very, very guarded, cautious, hopeful optimism that we'll see something better, but at least we'll alleviate terrible, terrible situation in Gaza that the Netanyahu regime has brought about. So heartbreaking. Well, fellas, it's been wonderful visiting with you. We have a tradition at the Contrarian. We like to go around and ask what you're looking forward to.
Yeah. Well,
Just
it's
to
yeah.
end on a note of hope.
Like,
The elections. Like, I mean, if you have to think ahead, this next few weeks is going to be very tough, Norm. I'm just going to say it's going to be a rough couple of weeks. So, in order to find that sense of hope, the thing I have to look forward to is, when the Israeli government comes back in October. I hope that there will be, and there's a very good chance there will be a real crisis in the Knesset that will lead to the government falling and lead to elections, as Elon has indicated, being called for sometime early in 26. So that is the thing that does give me hope in all of this. And it's a few months away, but it's something to keep an eye on the horizon.
yeah, and I will say, even if it's folks, even some of the folks in there, to give you even a little more hope, are more of the Bennetts or Liebermans of the world. Like, we're also going to have Yair Golan and Yair Lapid and more liberals. So if those guys are playing the roles of kingmakers instead of Smotrich and Ben Gvir, I'm looking forward to a government like that, where liberal Zionists do have a piece of the equation and a real say in a future Israeli government.
How about you? What are you looking forward to, Norm?
I'm looking forward to the continued advent of pro-democracy political leaders winning at the ballot box and fighting for this vision of justice, a two-state solution, and peace, like Cyril in New Jersey or Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. There's a generation of American political leaders, a new generation. Jerry Nadler, who's I had the privilege of working for when I helped lead the first impeachment of Donald Trump. Nadler was the chair of the Judiciary Committee. Jerry Nadler just announced, and we're going to miss him terribly. He's stepping aside. That creates room, though. He said, I admire it so much. He said, well, I want to make room for the next generation while I'm still at the top of my game. And so I'm excited about that next generation of political leader. And I think you're going to see some good ones instead of these lapdogs for the anti-democratic Trump and Netanyahu. You're seeing some independent thinkers who understand the importance of continuing to work for peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I'm looking forward to that.
Great.
Well, Norm, thank you so much for joining us at Word on the Street. There's quite a good crowd of folks. Many of them came on because you are here, and I know they're contrarian followers, and just want to urge folks to sign up for Word on the Street and subscribe so that we can engage you in more of these weekly conversations. I think we had your partner in crime, Jen Rubin, on a week ago, and we've got other great guests planned from Israel and the United States and Palestine over the course of the weeks ahead. And so sign up for Word on the Street and stick with Alon and me. We're going to talk a little bit for the next 15 minutes or so about a few other things. But Norm, thank you so much for joining us.
We'll see
Thanks
if
for having me as the guest.
Norm, thank you. Appreciate you.
Keep up the great work, guys.
All right. We'll see you down the road. Oh, Elon, it is just so great to see Norm and to know the work that he is involved in. We didn't actually get to talk about his bio, but everything from founding the leading ethics watchdog in Washington, D.C., to being the ethics counsel in the Obama White House, being a ambassador to the Czech Republic. I went to visit him and stayed with his family at the ambassador's residence in Prague. And, his mom was a Holocaust survivor from the Czech Republic. And for the son of a Holocaust survivor to go back as the ambassador of the United States and to live in the building that the ambassador in Prague lives in, which was the Nazi headquarters, right? I mean, it is just an amazing story. And he's an amazing person, involved in so many critical aspects of, work both to save our democracy and for the sake of the Jewish people and for Israel.
No, when I was on the campaign doing Jewish outreach, and Norm was one of our strongest supporters, and he constantly had literally an army of millions. I didn't understand it, and all the different things he was balancing at the same time, but he would always mysteriously show up when I when I needed him to. Except for the time where like he thought he was on the phone with me, but was actually on the phone with one of my intern volunteers who's also named Elon and was asking for all kinds of important decisions. That
And the
created some
intern couldn't give
confusion.
the
So we
decision.
won't talk about that one incident. But other than that, like,
I love it. I love it. Well, he's always in the middle of 20 different things. I'm
yes,
really glad he had a
exactly.
half hour for us. So listen, we want to spend just a few minutes. We've got a nice large group with us, folks who may not normally, have joined us, and we're here for Norm. But let's talk about some of the things that are happening right now. In particular, this week, the Trump administration had a few major moves that I think are just, nothing ever goes beyond the pale with them because everything is beyond the pale. But this week, the latest thing was denying visas to the Palestinian leadership to come to the UN General Assembly in September. I mean, this is a obligation, isn't it, under a treaty of the United States?
Yeah, and also denying, really shutting down any person with a Palestinian passport from being able to get into the United States. And I think what's happening here is you have all these European states who are reacting to just the horrors in Gaza and also the backsliding that's happening in the West Bank with all the things Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are doing. And they are saying, okay, enough is enough. We're going to recognize a Palestinian state come September as a message to, really to the Netanyahu government, but also as an affirmation of the importance of having a Palestinian state. And the Israeli government response to this is to double down on all the negative things that they are doing, especially pushing for things like potentially annexation, which they're talking about. But now the Trump administration is jumping in really to this kind of far right Israeli narrative, which is not in the American interests, right? And are saying, okay, we're going to punish the Palestinian Authority which is, by the way, let's be clear about what the Palestinian Authority is. They're not perfect. They have challenges with governance and corruption. They also don't get a lot of support from Israel for these things. But at the end of the day, like they are the Palestinian governing alternative that is against violence and for using peaceful means to get to a Palestinian state. And now the Trump administration is punishing them by saying no visas for any of you to participate in this UN meeting, even though like we really are obligated under agreements which have us as the United States hosting the UN General Assembly and hosting the UN. We're supposed to really let anybody in. We're letting the Iranian government leadership come to this meeting next month at the UN General Assembly. We have Russians and Chinese and others coming, but now the Palestinian Authority, who's again the only real Palestinian alternative you have to Hamas. They apparently are going to get shunned because Netanyahu asked Trump to do it. And look, part of this is, Jeremy, and you and I have talked about, is Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have a long history of opposing anything that sounds like Palestinian statehood, and actually like took a lot of steps before October 7th to basically empower Hamas, including allowing like millions of dollars to go into Gaza, really cash for Hamas, while at the same time taking every opportunity to undercut the Palestinian Authority. Again, Palestinian Authority is far from perfect, but they are the only game in town that is not Hamas. And so while we are taking every opportunity to like beat them down is just entirely self-defeating, if you ask me.
So on the one hand, one thing that happened in the last few days is this denial of, or the policy that they're going to deny visas to Palestinians. And by the way, we mentioned passport holders. I just want to be really clear. The Palestinians, because they don't have a state, do not have passports. They have to have identity cards and then get travel papers from another country, often from Jordan.
I think they do get passports, actually, Jeremy. There is a Palestinian passport. Like, I was looking at this. We should talk about that.
Okay. Yes. All right. Today we were saying that they don't.
Yes. No. And then I did some more
the
research
residents
on
of
it
East
and realized that they
Jerusalem.
do. Yes.
The residents of East Jerusalem do not have a passport. And
right.
so they have to travel on travel papers.
Yes.
So in addition to this decision in the last week, the White House held a meeting on Wednesday about the day after in Gaza. And apparently the Washington Post got their hands on a 36-page glossy brochure that was distributed and discussed at the meeting that's called the Great Plan. Can you tell us a little bit about this Great plan that the White House seems to have for the day after of Gaza.
Sure. And I think that like the word G is for Gaza, and I'm not exactly sure what the rest of it is for. I wouldn't be surprised if T is for Trump. I'd have to go look at it again. But Jeremy, as you and I have talked about before, like when I was working in government, like I was one of those people very early on, really helping lead our planning for day after. And I know how complicated and hard this is. Um, and also just to remind everybody, the bottom line is like you can't replace Hamas with nothing. If you're ever going to quote unquote defeat Hamas, you have to have a governing and security alternative to it. We're now 2 years into this war, and the Israelis still don't have any kind of a realistic plan for that. We were pushing them from the very beginning of the war on this because of our own experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, in Vietnam, where we failed to do this effectively. We've also had examples such as the counter ISIS campaign where we did do it effectively, but it takes work from the very beginning. And then one of the most important things is actually having a viable, legitimate government and security mechanism that's actually indigenous and can be held by the local population. And so those are the kinds of plans were developing and building.
Tell us a little bit about this plan. This is an
Yes, because
insane plan, right? I mean, this is certifiably insane.
This is the opposite of that. First of all, it's basically like been cooked up by like some combination of consultants and private equity folks, from what you can tell from the presentations. But it basically is that Trump plan of like, let's move all the Palestinians who live in Gaza out of Gaza, and basically put them in a couple of little areas while you redevelop the entire area. It involves tokens people get for the value of like their home, and like certain like you could basically like give people money to leave, then use private equity funds to like redevelop the entire area. They're going around the Gulf looking for like big initial investments. um you know uh, it didn't make a lot of sense to me, but like I think the bottom line is essentially like push everybody out of Gaza, like bring in a bunch of big foreign investors to like totally change the place, um, and then somehow have people start to come back. It doesn't have any support from the Arab states. It's got no support from Palestinians. I don't think there was a
There wasn't a
Palestinian.
Palestinian in the room. I mean, there was
Yeah,
no engagement. But you know who was there? I mean, this is
Trump.
insane, right? Tony Blair and Jared Kushner were there, and this gives it for Tony Blair, who actually tried, to organize Europeans, organize the quartet, try to work towards peace. I mean, I don't understand what he is doing, giving legitimacy at the Trump White House to this kind of a process and this kind of a meeting.
Yeah, no, it's actually, I mean, Blair, frankly, has become like a less helpful actor in recent years in this conflict, consistently looking for like ways to be relevant. But he's really lost all credibility with Palestinians for one. So like it's really hard, and this is only gonna make it worse. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still basically like, it comes down to essentially like a near ethnic cleansing plan. The one promising thing I have heard is at least some willingness. Look, if you're going to move Palestinians out of Gaza, the only place I think realistically to put them is in Israel, frankly, in the Negev, like if you need more space, which is an idea that's now being tossed out there. And it sounds like was partially discussed at this meeting or in other venues, because at least if you can have Palestinians still remaining within the 48 borders, like there's some potential there. I mean, the other thing I should also just say before we leave this topic, Jeremy, is this: we're not exactly sure this latest plan, which has been kind of leaked and 38 pages, looks like it's a few months old, largely cooked up by a number of partners from like Boston Consulting Group, who've since been fired for doing things that they were unauthorized to do. It's the same group who also brought us the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that distribution aid mechanism in Gaza that so far led to more than 1,000 deaths there, and also I think just been a horrific disaster that has partially brought on the starvation that we are seeing. So it's got a lot of problems. Shall we just leave it at that? I wanted to turn to you though, Jeremy, also, and ask you a little bit about again what's happening in the United States. like one significant thing I think we saw just this week that's really important for J Street is a real champion and a hero, Jerry Nadler. Norm talked about, Jerry Nadler is retiring and said he's not going to run for reelection. Like, what do you make of that?
Yeah, no, Norm worked for Jerry during the first impeachment. He was the co-counsel in the first Trump impeachment. It's amazing that you have to talk about multiple impeachments when you talk about a president and say, well, that was the first impeachment, not the second impeachment. And yet here we are. Um, Jerry Nadler is really just one of the icons of J Street and of liberal Jews. I grew up in Jerry's district. I mean, that's the Upper West Side is my home district, and Jerry's represented that now for 32 years. I remember when Ted Weiss, who was the prior congressman, died in office, and so there had to be a special election. And I was the president of our Democratic club on the Upper West Side, and there was there's 3 Democratic clubs, and Jerry was affiliated with one of the other 2 clubs, and we all had our own candidates for this seat, and then my club ended up cutting a deal with Jerry's club, and Jerry ended up getting the seat in this. Essentially, 300 people voted on the Democratic state committee level, and as a result of that, he's been in Congress for 32 years. So I know him well. He is just a superior human being. Has really been dedicated to all the right causes. Worked his way up to be the chair of the Judiciary Committee. Spoke out, back 10 years ago already, wrote a very, very detailed memo that his colleagues really listened to about why he was going to support Obama and the Iran nuclear agreement. He has thought long and hard about questions like how do you regulate arms sales to Israel? And he came out yesterday and said that he could no longer justify sending offensive weapons, given what Israel is doing in Gaza. Which is not an easy thing for someone of Jerry's background. He went to yeshiva, deeply Zionist, really cares about Israel. And for him to have reached the point at the age of 78 where he is turning around and saying it's time for the United States to stop sending weapons of that kind to Israel is really something. But he's a man of conscience and a man of his morals, and I wasn't surprised to hear him say that. It's time. I think he's right. It's time for generational change, and absolutely respect the decision that he made. But it'll leave a gaping hole for all of us in the J Street community in Congress, because he's been also the dean of the Jewish delegation in Congress for the last couple of terms.
Yeah, and a champion of some of the legislation that we've been promoting most strongly, including the West Bank Violence Prevention Act, which it really goes after extremist settlers and the violent settlers in the West Bank, something we tried to work on during the Biden administration, and he's been out in front on. And it's just like you said, it's really important to have a voice like his, leading and representing, and kind of putting in place, kind of the exact kind of Jewish values we talked about at J Street.
Exactly. Well, Elon, it's been a wonderful conversation. For those who are just joining now, you'll be able to watch the whole conversation we had with Norm Eisen from The Contrarian. Norm, who's leading the legal battles on behalf of democracy and taking on this president and the MAGA movement and all their efforts to try to undo democracy. It was a great conversation with Norm. We did wide-ranging topics from Israel to the United States and democracy and justice and a little bit of religion and a little bit of Jewish morals. It was a great conversation. So please do watch it. This is Word on the Street. We come to you live, generally speaking, Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll always send out a notice to let you know when it's going to be. But we do a weekly show, and please subscribe. If you're new to Word on the Street, do subscribe on Substack. We'll send out commentaries on the issues of the day from me and from Elon, from other really amazing writers and thinkers and fellows. And Elon, any final words?
No, that sounds it. Great to be back with everybody. One of my least favorite days of the year, the Tuesday after Labor Day. So
yeah, no, the traffic is back, and it is time to get back to work. Here in Washington, it was nice and quiet for all of August. I will say that.
Yeah,
all right,
for sure.
Thanks everybody. Take care.